that?
I was reading this by Bringhurst, and at the end, he has an essay called Breathing Through the Feet, an autobiographical meditation. And he sort of, it's autobiographical, as you might guess, but he says another teacher I never met and who knew a lot about breathing was Ezra Pound. But Pound also exemplifies the extraordinary factionist, the imbalance, the self-righteousness and paranoia, and the fearful patriotism and pride of your American civilization. So he weaves him in for a few more paragraphs in here, but it's probably the best, most objective, economical assessment of Pound, not like overall, not specific work around, what his legacy is and how we might think about him. And I just thought it was really interesting. And because Bringhurst is such a good writer, it made no sense to pull the excerpts because they're so woven into what his bigger ideas about language and all of that. But it's 7 pages, I think, altogether. And it's so worth a look.
And tell us, what's the name of the book? I didn't see it when you held it up.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's backwards. Pieces of Map, Pieces of Music, Copper Canyon Press, released at 1987. Poems by Robert Bringhurst.
Okay. So it's a poetry book, but then has a sort of essay and a poem.
Yeah, in true Bringhurst fashion, it's there's, it reminded me of going through the Cantos because there's, there's this kind of thing. He spent 10 years learning Arabic. He's spent a lot of time translating Chinese and trying to learn it, and never mind all the Native American languages. And he has a wonderful one at the end about water where some of the words are in blue and the rest are, anyway, here's one, Tending the Fire. Just a big circle. I have no idea what it means because I haven't read that section yet, but anyway.
And you scanned it. Yeah. And and then did autocorrect or something?
Well,
scanned the text?
Because I refused to buy yet another software and pay an annual fee for it. I couldn't use Adobe, so I scanned it and then took it into Snippets, which you can just use. And then Snippets lets you copy the text, but of course it puts it in it's an odd, narrow little setup. But I went through and corrected all that and fixed it up so that it's a complete and easily read document with most of the errors taken out of it that were as a result of the scanning and the various softwares at work. So, but that's how much I thought it was worth too.
And I've dropped it into the chat, so cool. It's there for anyone to see.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah. And that was the Sam era Copper Canyon.
Oh, that explains it.
Yeah.
Of course, Sam has a book of his own called A Pizan Canto, which was written in homage to Ezra Pound and published, I think, in a nice small edition, maybe even letterpress cover, written, I think, after Sam had visited Pisa.
Yes. It's in here somewhere.
Well, Pound draws a parallel between Bringhurst draws a parallel between Pound going into his internment in Italy in 1946 as a Japanese priest in the US was coming out of Heart Mountain in Wyoming. And I didn't realize Bringhurst had lived in Wyoming and Idaho. And
published by Floating Bridge Press, I believe. Yeah, Floating Bridge Press in 2004. And it says this chapbook was produced as a special project by Floating Bridge Press, cover image by Galen Garwood.
Wow.
It's also in Cascadian Zen and collaborated with Sam on at least one beautiful book. And I think that's all it says. Yeah, it's a nice book. Thanks for
And
bringing
what's
that up.
the title again?
A Piece on Canto.
Okay.
And yeah, there you have it. So here we go. So we have that in the documents, and we have the recording going, and Matt Treese won't be here, and he sends his regrets, but we still have 14 participants, so I think we're just about up at capacity. So oh wait, we have to wait for Mateo. Can't do anything without Mateo. Let's let him in since he's missed a couple classes and was watching on the recording, and we'll have this recording up. The recording will go on the main. Oh, Jim Dodd. Is Jim in the room? Jim, yeah, Jim's in the room. Okay, good. And Mary Ruth is here. That's excellent. I think everybody but Matt Treese, and he sent his regrets last night. And it feels a little sad to be stopping our weekly Sunday explorations of the Cantos, but we've covered a lot of ground, and we're ready to cover some more. And with that said, Andrew, I just want to say we'd really love to have you back and teach something in the fall. The feedback that I'm getting is exemplary, as I expected it would be, and we'd really like to. We'll talk about it, and I'll start returning your emails. I'm sorry, we were in Portland and we had the reading at Broadway Books, which went very, very well for Cascadian Zen. So a little preoccupied with that and the home front, but other than that, things are swinging. 308, Andrew, all yours.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. Some of you have been with it for now 16 weeks, and some for just 8. It's a journey that could go a long time. I've been thinking about a beautiful canto, which I don't know that we'll get to. Maybe we'll have enough time today, but the opening line of Canto 99, which is in the section called Thrones, is when the bluegrass turns yellow. And those of us who live in places where winter brings precipitation and spring and summer bring aridity or sunshine or dryness, that's sort of what we've done. We've gone from the bluegrass to the yellow. So let me see. I wanted to just open, if we don't need to cue this up, Paul, but if anybody has their book with them and wants to go to page 831 for just a moment, I wanted to just start with a little piece of humor, which, like many pieces of humor, goes deeper and deeper if you can. So I'm sorry, not 831. This would be 651 if you've got the book with you. And it would be a little over, well, you'll see a third of the way down. Oh my God, Egyptian hieroglyphs, since we were just talking about Chinese ideograms and Arabic letters. And now we've got an Egyptian hieroglyph. And about 8 lines below that, I wanted to point out, it starts with a quote mark, OU. OU, as Dante says, in the dinghy astern there must be incognita, and in sea caves, un lume bien di spiriti, a light filled with spirits, and of memories. Shall 2 know the same in their knowing? You who dare Persephone's threshold, beloved, do not fall apart in my hands. That OU, as Dante says in the dinghy astern there, is an actual quote from Canto 2 of Dante's Paradiso. And it may throw a little light on it if I read a translation of Alan Mandelbaum's translation. The word that Pound has wonderfully translated as dinghy is picciolito in the Italian, like a little piccio, a little boat, a little dinghy. You know how they sling a dinghy at the back of a yacht or something as a lifeboat. But Mandelbaum's translation says, "Oh, you who are within your little bark, eager to listen, following behind my ship that singing crosses to deep seas, turn back to see your shores again. Do not attempt to sail the seas I sail. You may, by losing sight of me, be left astray." That has been variously interpreted as, well, I think Allen Ginsberg has the great line. Allen Ginsberg says, "Don't follow my path to ruin." I think it's been interpreted as Ezra Pound both being anxious that readers can't keep up. Oh my God, now we've got Egyptian hieroglyphs in the text to deal with. And also a little bit of a serious despair and warning, which is that he's really going places that nobody's been before. And who is there that can keep up with him? And so, at least for Dante, it's the warning: turn back. I've got a big ship that I'm going out on, and you're in a little dinghy back there, and it can get frightening and you can get lost. And if you lose track of me, you'll be utterly astray. So that's "Oh, you," as Dante says, in the dinghy astern there. So that's the Piccioletto. We're all in our little Picciolettas. We're all in our little Picciolettas trying to follow this enormous ship out into the open ocean. And I know that I generally open, each of these sessions with a few thoughts on the cantos or the poetics that go into them, or something about Ezra Pound's life, about other American poets and their relationships, either with Pound or with the cantos as a book. But I wanted to jump back for a moment to 1979, which is when I first read the cantos in their entirety in a course, graduate course in comparative literature at Berkeley. I was not a graduate student, but I sweet talked my way into the course with a guy named Michael Andre Bernstein, who ended up writing a pretty good book about Ezra Pound called The Tale of the Tribe. In 1979, when I read the cantos, I would say Ezra Pound's reputation was at its apex. I would not be surprised if every major university in the United States had a course on the cantos or a course on Ezra Pound. There were several journals specifically dedicated to sort of articulating or exemplifying or just plain glossing his work in the cantos. Pound had been dead for, let's say, about 7 years in 1979. I may be off by a year or two when I took this course, but if you think back, that was a little over 40 years ago, and I doubt there's a single university that would dare offer a course on Ezra Pound or the cantos right now. Pound's been shorn of let's say his politics have shorn him of serious readers. His politics have certainly shorn him of serious consideration in the universities, the places that worked so hard to keep his reputation alive for quite a while. I no longer teach Ezra Pound in a university context. I've grown tired of trying to persuade anybody or defend, Ezra Pound. There's aspects of him that are indefensible, particularly his politics, and it's no fun anymore. And yet I still believe his is the great book of the 20th century. Everything is in it, from pre-Raphaelitism through modernism up towards postmodernism. through fascism, through the wackiness we're seeing all over our country now, through mythology, through the beat poets, through the San Francisco Renaissance, into the language poets. And I want to just add one detail that I got in about 1982, so several years after I became a serious reader of the Cantos. I moved to Berkeley, and one of the first performances I was greeted by was a performance in San Francisco of Ezra Pound's two operas. Pound wrote two operas, one based on the life of the poet Villon. It was called Le Testament de Villon, which is one of the titles for Villon's great work, Villon being the other, well-known, let's say, European poet who lived for a time on death row. And then another opera that Pound wrote called Cavalcanti, based on, the medieval Italian poet who was so influential on Dante. At the performance, they had brought Olga Rudge over from Italy. She was housed in a kind of opera box on the second loge up there. And before the opera started, she was introduced, stood up, waved, and took a bow to the audience, who roundly applauded her. And it must have been a very high moment for her at the, as I said, apex of Ezra Pound's reputation. Down in the the lower level, where the less expensive seats were, the non-opera seats, were a lot of poets and writers and publishers and various dignitaries, including, I recognize, Jack Shoemaker of North Point Press and Counterpoint Press. And he had brought Gary Snyder to see the operas too. And I have no idea who else was in the, I knew a lot of the language poets were there, and then writers younger than that. Tom Parkinson, who was a professor at Berkeley and a longtime member of the San Francisco Renaissance. Tom Parkinson shows up in one of Jack Kerouac's books. He's the young college professor who famously throws Kerouac and his drunk friends out of his house because his children are sleeping. Tom Parkinson and his wife, Ariel, put on these operas in San Francisco. And I knew Parkinson a bit because I also studied modernism with him. We read the four quartets, we read Wallace Stevens, we read Ezra Pound's Cathay. And once when I was visiting with him in his office, he told me, now Parkinson had written two books on William Butler Yeats, and he told me that while he was writing those books and going through Yeats' papers, he found a letter from Ezra Pound to William Butler Yeats. This was at a time when Yeats was a member of the Irish Senate. He was a senator in the newly founded Irish Republic. And there was a letter from Ezra Pound asking if Yeats could facilitate and streamline Ezra Pound getting Irish citizenship. He wanted to renounce his American citizenship and his passport and get Irish citizenship. The letter got no response as far as Parkinson's research could tell. And the reason I bring that up is, imagine if Ezra Pound had gotten Irish citizenship. If he had, the Cantos would not be the book that we know. There would have been no internment in Pisa. There would have been no internment in St. Elizabeth's Bug House. It would have been an extraordinarily different book for the second half of the book, from Cantos really 74 on. Pound had been very close to Yeats for a number of years, and I assumed that Yeats's lack of response was more along the lines that he was just busy as a new senator of a new republic trying to deal with his poetry. And I see Stanley has just put in the chat William Butler Yeats's, yes, I've got a copy of it here too, A Vision, which opens with a little section called A Packet for Ezra Pound. And I thought I would read just a couple of sentences from that packet because it's interesting as we move forward through the piece on. Yeats opens by describing Rapallo, where Pound was living, and talking about it as a tourist village, and talks about wanting to go for an extended stay there. Part two, he opens, I shall not lack conversation. Ezra Pound, whose art is the opposite of mine. I love this, that there are these two men who can have conversations who have art that is the opposite of each other. Ezra Pound, whose art is the opposite of mine, whose criticism commends what I most condemn, a man with whom I should quarrel more than anyone else if we were not united by affection, has for years lived in rooms opening onto a flat roof by the sea. For the last hour, we've sat upon the roof, which is also a garden, discussing that immense poem of which but 27 cantos are already published. I have often found there brightly printed kings, queens, knaves, but have never discovered why all the suits could not be dealt out in some quite different order. Now, at last, he explains that it will, when the 100th canto is finished, display a structure like that of a Bach fugue. There will be no plot, no chronicle events, no logic of discourse, but two themes, the descent into Hades from Homer, a metamorphosis from Ovid, and mixed with these, medieval or modern historical characters. Anyhow, Pound never got his Irish citizenship and passport, so he ended up in the detention training center at Pisa, and after that, 12 years in St. Elizabeth's Hospital for the criminally insane. And so we are going to, I think, pick up with Ezra Pound where we left off last week and look at these final Pisan cantos, which I think are, as I said, one of the reasons to read them is that this is the controversial book that won the big prize, the book that I'm pretty sure brought Ezra Pound to the attention of the whole generation of poets coming of age in the 50s and 60s. And, most people are in agreement that it's the finest volume of the cantos. I think personally, I couldn't lift it out from the rest of the cantos. You've got to see it as part and parcel. But let's go maybe to page 543, the opening of Canto 82, page 543. If you remember, what we've just left off with was pull down thy vanity, master thyself, then others shall bear thee. Pull down thy vanity, thou art a beaten dog beneath the hail, a swollen magpie in a fitful sun, half black, half white, nor knowest thou wing from tail. Pull down thy vanity, how mean thy hates fostered in falsity. Pull down thy vanity, I say, pull down. And now we're going to go into Canto 82 here. When with his hunting dog I see a cloud, Guten Morgen, mein Herr, yells the black boy from the Joe cart. Jeffers, Lavelle, and Harley. Also, Mr. Walls, who has lent me a razor. Persia, Nadasky, and Harbell. And now we're going to go into a a number of just memories of London when Pound was a young man. And I may gloss a few of them, but that'll just give you a little orientation. Swinburne, my only miss. And I didn't know he'd been to see Landor. And they told me that this, that, and t'other. And when old Matthews went, he saw the 3 teacups. 2 for Watts Dunton, who liked to let his tea cool. Now, Matthews is Elkin Matthews, who published several Pound's early books back in the days when booksellers who had bookstores were in the business of publishing, particularly poetry. And Elkin Matthews had published Yeats, and through Yeats got Ezra Pound onto the list. So old Elkin had only one glory. He did carry Algernon's suitcase once when he, Elkin, first came to London. But given what I know now, I'd have got through it somehow. Dearsea's shade or a blackjack. When the French fisherman hauled him out, he recited them. Might have been Aeschylus till they got into Le Portel or wherever in the original. Just quick little gloss on that. This is a story of Swinburne went for a swim and got swept away by the tide and was picked up by a French fishing boat. And Swinburne, all the way back to shore at a place called Le Portel, recited poetry to the sailors who loved it. He did not recite Aeschylus. Pound has it wrong. That's okay. There's a lot of errors in the cantos. But when the French fisherman hauled him out, he recited them. Might have been Aeschylus till they got into Le Portel or wherever in the original. I think this line's really interesting. We've left behind the Pound of the certainty of books before him. He's got no books. So he's remembering the story of Swinburne getting into the port at Le Portel or wherever in the original. We'd never have gotten that tone of voice or wherever, and we're going to see it again. And now we're going to jump into Aeschylus. On the Atreides roof, like a dog and a good job. This is a line from the opening of Aeschylus's Agamemnon, with a watchman standing on the roof, and it likens himself to a dog. And then we have a cry from Clytemnestra. This Greek says, "My husband." And remember, Clytemnestra murders her husband with her own hand. She stabs him in the bathtub in the Agamemnon. Emoi, my husband, my hand, hoc dextera mortus, dead by this hand. Believe Lytton first saw a blunt in the bull ring, as it might have been Brother Packard and our brother Percy. Bassanio's manuscript with the Greek molds in the margin. Otis Soncino. Otis and Soncino are 2 early bookmakers, typesetters, pioneers of printing. So we've got Greek molds in the margin, Otis Soncino. The Marblemen shall pass into nothingness. And the gloss on this seems to be Pound's thinking about the difference between the durability of literature and the stupidity of marble statues, the marble men, who are just, whoever, fancy men, generals, fighters, emperors, who cares? They're not the ones who survive. The ones who survive are the ones who are in the manuscript with the Greek molds in the margin. Otis Soncino, the marble men shall pass into nothingness. 3 birds on the wire. Remember, we've seen birds on the wire before as he's looking out. 3 birds on the wire. So requested Mr. Clowes to sleep on the same, as to who would pay for the composition if same were not used. Elkin Matthews, my bantam, After all, said Mr. Burrell, it is only the old story of Tom Moore and Rogers. Pound here is remembering one of his early books called Lustra, which the type compositor refused to typeset because of the presence of 17 poems he thought obscene. And there was a lot of negotiation with Elkin Matthews to drop these, these suppressed poems. And Tom Moore and Rogers refer to earlier poets who had their works censored by the type compositors. Her ladyship arose in the night and moved all the furniture. That is, her ladyship YX. Her ladyship Z disliked dining alone, and the proud shall not lie by the proud amid dim green lighted with candles. Mabel Beardsley's red head for a glory. Mr. Maysfield murmuring death, and old Neptune meaning something unseizable in a discussion of Flaubert. Miss Tomczyk, the medium, baffling the Society for Metaphysical Research, and the idea that conversation should not utterly wither. Even I can remember, at 18 Woburn Buildings, said Mr. Tancred of the Jerusalem and Sicily Tancreds to Yeats, if you would read us one of your own choice and perfect lyrics. And more's the pity that Dickens died twice with the disappearance of Tancred. And for all that, old Ford's conversation was better. This is Ford Madox Ford, who we've seen mourned in an earlier piece on Fordy, who wrote of giants. But I love these next lines. And for all that, old Ford's conversation was better, consisting in res non verba, objects, not words. Despite William's anecdotes, that's probably William Butler Yeats, despite Yeats's anecdotes, in that Fordy never dented an idea for a phrase's sake. This is a line I pull out all the time. I have to use it when I teach students. Don't dent an idea for a phrase's sake. It's such good advice from Ezra Pound, who you could say dented his own book for an idea's sake, really badly banged up his book for an idea's sake. And for all that, old Ford's conversation was better, consisting in objects, not words, despite William's anecdotes, in that Fordy never dented an idea for a phrase's sake and had more humanitas, gen, Cythera, with Dirce in one bark conveyed. Be glad, poor beast, love follows after thee, till the cricket hops, but does not chirp in the drill field. 8th day of September, F, F, D, G, write the birds in their treble scale, Terius. There are no righteous wars in the spring and autumn. That is perfectly right on one side or the other, total right on either side of the battle line. And the news is a long time moving, a long time in arriving through the impenetrable, crystalline, indestructible ignorance of locality. The news was quicker in Troy's time. I want to stop there just for a moment to gloss that. We began the canto with the watchman from Aeschylus, or from the Agamemnon of Aeschylus, on top of the tower. And if you remember that, he's been up there for 10 years watching for news from Troy. Does anybody remember how the news got spread? That the idea was that the watchman would be alerted when Troy had fallen and the Greek soldiers were going to come home from war. Does anybody remember how the news was spread? They had around the Mediterranean a sequence of towers on top of which were brush piles. And the idea was when Troy fell, the soldiers at Troy would light a fire on top of a tower, and the next tower would see it light their fire. The next tower would see it light their fire, and it would go in a matter of moments all the way back to Agamemnon's home and across the Mediterranean to the Greek world. So this is, I think a sort of interesting gloss that Pound has brought up, thinking again of the destruction of Troy, probably rhyming it with the destruction that he's seeing in Italy now. There are no righteous wars in the spring and autumn, which is the Chinese chronicle of warfare, the spring and autumn chronicles. That is perfectly right on one side or the other, total right on either side of the battle line. And the news is a long time moving. It's taken a long time for Pound to get news, for instance, of Ford Madox Ford's death, Aubrey Beardsley's death, William Butler Yeats's death, James Joyce's death. And he's just hearing it now and beginning to remember them and drop them into his canto here. And the news is a long time moving, a long time in arriving through the impenetrable, crystalline, indestructible ignorance of locality. The news was quicker in Troy's time. A match on Gnidos, that's the match that starts one of these brush piles. A glowworm on Mytilene, till 40 years since, Reithmuller, indignant. Why, in Denmark, effing de peasants know him, meaning Whitman. Exotic, still suspect, 4 miles from Camden. Oh, troubled reflection, oh, throat, oh, throbbing heart. These are lines from Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking. How drawn, O Gaia Terra, O Earth, Earth, that's Greek and then Latin. How drawn, O Gaia Terra, what draws as thou drawest, till one sink into thee by an arm's width, embracing thee. Drawest, truly thou drawest. Wisdom lies next thee, simply past metaphor. I want to just stop here and just think about the progression here. This memory, we don't even know who this man Reithmuller is who's indignant. He's probably Danish. Reithmuller, indignant. Why, in Denmark, effing the peasants know him. Meaning Whitman, exotic, still suspect, 4 miles from Camden. Remember, Whitman wrote his book Leaves of Grass. And the lines here from Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking, are his great meditation on death, where Whitman remembers as a young boy going down to the seaside and hears a bird singing, and at first is struck by the beauty of the song, and then realizes it's a bird that has lost its mate, and he hears the song as the song of death. Oh, troubled reflection, oh, throat, oh, throbbing heart. So we've got Leaves of Grass, a song of death from a bird, and now Pound's own song of practically dying. How drawn, O Gaia Terra, what draws as thou drawest, till one sink into thee by an arm's width, embracing thee, drawest, truly thou drawest. Wisdom lies next thee, simply, past metaphor. Where I lie, let the thyme rise, and basilicum. Let the herbs rise in April abundant. By Ferrara was buried naked fu Nicolo e di qua di là del Po. Wind, and the Greek says, back to my house. Lie into earth to the breastbone, to the left shoulder. Kipling suspected it, to the height of 10 inches or over. Man, earth, two halves of the tally. But I will come out of this knowing no one, neither they me. Connubium terrae, wedded to the earth, and then the Greek phonos, mysterium, earthborn, fluid, phonos, overflowed me, lay in the fluid, phonos, that's earthborn, that lie under the air's solidity, drunk with ichor of phonos, fluid phonos, strong as the undertow of the wave receding, but that a man should live in that further terror and live. The loneliness of death came upon me at 3 p.m. for an instant, and the Greek words mean weeping. Thereupon, 3 solemn half notes, their white downy chests, black rimmed, on the middle wire, paraplum. So interestingly, a canto that starts out as recollections of London turns into a meditation on the death of his friends, and then a vision of the death of himself, or at least a moment that the loneliness of death came upon him at 3 p.m. for an instant. And then he looks back and sees the musical notes of the birds on the wires out there, 3 solemn half notes, their white downy chests black rimmed on the middle wire, paraplum. Quick word on this paraplum. It's shown up a few times in the cantos, and it's a Latin word, and it refers to maps of the coastline of the Mediterranean made by sailors who are mapping the coast as it's seen from sea. These are not the maps we're used to that look as though from above at the layout of the land. These are maps specifically for sailors. And it's a great clue to what's going on here in the piece on Cantos, that in some sense, Pound is no longer able to chart civilization. He's no longer able to chart history, to chart politics, to chart literature. All he can see is what he can see from his little dinghy or his little boat. He's just mapping what he can see of the shoreline, which is his memory, his recollections, his visions, his remembrance of Whitman, his vision of dying and sinking into the earth like the earth is fluid. He remembers Swinburne being swept away by an undertow, and he feels himself swept away by the undertow of the earth. And he asks for time and basilicum to grow over him and to grow again in April. And then he admits that the loneliness of death came upon him. And then he returns to the 3 solemn notes, which are 3 birds, their white downy chests black rimmed on the middle wire. And that, of course, is an ideogram with Whitman's song of death that comes from the bird and out of the cradle endlessly rocking. And then Pound gives us the one clue to what he's doing, paraplum. He's writing a map of his own mind or his own life from where he stands or sits and sees it. Let's move to the next page, Canto 83. 3. We've got udor, the Greek, which means water. Remember the previous canto we had Swinburne swept away in the water by an undertow. We had Whitman down at the beach visiting the ocean and listening to the ocean. What is the ocean singing? And then he hears the words from the bird. The ocean is singing death, death, death. The water is udor, water. Udor, epox, peace. Gemisto stemmed all from Neptune. Gemisto, if you remember, his bones were brought by Malatesta, Sigismundo Malatesta from Byzantium. His bones were brought and put in a sarcophagus at the Tempio in Rapallo. Gemisto stemmed all from Neptune, who is, of course, not only the god of water, but the one whose hand holds the fate of Odysseus. Gemisto stemmed all from Neptune, hence the Rimini bas-reliefs. Said Mr. Yeats, WB, nothing affects these people except our conversation. Lux enim ignis est accidens. For light is an accident or an attribute of ignis. Lux enim ignis est accidens. Light is an attribute of fire. And wrote the Prete in his edition of Scotus, hilaritas, the virtue hilaritas. The queen stitched King Carolus's shirts or whatever, while Erigena put Greek tags in his excellent verses. In fact, an excellent poet, Paris, Toujours Paris, Charles Le Chauve. And you might find a bit of enamel, a bit of true blue enamel on a metal pyx or whatever, omnia que sunt, lumina sunt, or whatever. So they dug up his bones in the time of de Montfort, Simon, le paradis n'est pas artificiel, and Uncle William dawdling around Notre Dame in search of whatever. Paused to admire the symbol with Notre Dame standing inside it, whereas in Etienne, or why not De Miracoli, mermaids, that carving, in the drenched tent, there is quiet. Seared eyes are at rest. The rain beat as with color of feldspar. Blue as the flying fish off the ugly. Pax, that's peace. Ichor and udor. That's ichor is the drink of the gods. It's the ambrosia. And there we've got udor again. The sage delighteth in water. The humane man has amity with the hills. As the grass grows by the weirs, thought Uncle William, consiros. Consiros means with longing. As the grass on the roof of St. What's-his-name, near Cane e Gatto. Notice all the wherevers. We've now got a St. What's-his-name. Pound can't even be bothered at this point to get facts straight. And he can't get his facts straight because he has no books with him. But notice what's happening to the poem, all the whatever, whatever, whatever. As the grass on the roof of St. What's-his-name, near Cane e Gatto, soll deine Liebe bin, soll deine Liebe sein, is to be your love. It would be about a level the windows, the grass would, or I dare say above that when they blessed the wax for the polio. Olim de Malatestis with Maria's face there in the fresco, painted 2 centuries sooner. At least that before she wore it. As Montino's and that family group of about 1820, not wholly hardy, and the Greek everything flows, which is from Heraclitus. As he was standing below the altars of the spirits of rain, when every hollow is full, it moves forward to the phantom mountain above the cloud, but in the caged panther's eyes, nothing, nothing that you can do. Green pool, under green of the jungle, caged, nothing, nothing that you can do. Dryad, your eyes are like clouds. Okay, for just a moment, let's catch that Pound is remembering a panther. So we see the panther, we've got the cats, we know something magical or mystical is about to happen. He sees the caged panther's eyes, sees it walking around in the cage, and hears it saying, nothing, nothing that you can do. And then the eyes are the green pool under green of the jungle, caged, nothing, nothing you can do. And then suddenly, Dryad, his name for HD, who was really his first girlfriend back in Pennsylvania. Dryad, your eyes are like clouds. Nor can who has passed a month in the death cells believe in capital punishment. No man who has passed a month in the death cells believes in cages for beasts. Dryad, your eyes are like the clouds over Taishan. When some of the rain has fallen and half remains yet to fall, the roots go down to the river's edge, and the hidden city moves upward, white ivory under the bark, with clouds over Taishan, Chokurua, when the blackberry ripens, and now the new moon faces Taishan, one must count by the dawn star. Dryad, thy peace is like water. There is September sun on the pools. Plura diaphana, Eliads lift the mist from the young willows. There is no base scene under Taishan, but the brightness of Udor, water, the poplar tips float in brightness. Only the stockade posts stand. And now the ants seem to stagger as the dawn sun has trapped their shadows. This breath wholly covers the mountains. It shines and divides. It nourishes by its rectitude, does no injury, overstanding the earth that fills the 9 fields to heaven. Boon companion to equity, it joins with the process. Lacking it, there is inanition. When the equities are gathered together as birds alighting, it springeth up vital. If deeds be not ensheathed and garnered in the heart, there is inanition. Have I perchance a debt to a man named Clower, that he eat of the barley corn and move with the seed's breath, the sun as a golden eye between dark cloud and the mountain? Non combattere, don't fight, said Giovanna, meaning, as before stated, don't work so hard. Don't not help grow, as it stands in the Kung Sun Chow. This is, maybe Pound's Poetics right here. Don't. And then we've got 3 ideograms, not help grow. And in the Kung Sun Chow, there's a story of a man who wanted his crops to prosper, and he thought the way to do it was to go out when his corn, rice was planted as little sprouts and pull on them to get them to grow up. And so the wisdom is not help grow. Don't try to make things or people grow. Don't help them. Let them do it themselves. We've all got the Tao within us. Don't need to help anything grow. You're as foolish as the man pulling his corn up by the tops to make it grow. Don't help grow as it stands in the Kung Sun Chow, San Gregorio, San Trovaso. Old Ziovan raced at 70 after his glories and came in long last, and the family eyes stayed the same Adriatic for 3 generations, San Vio, and was, I suppose, last month the Redentore as usual. Will I ever see Guidec again? Or the lights against it? Ca' Foscari? Ca' Justinian? Or the cause, they say, of Desdemona? Or the 2 towers where the cypress no more, where are the cypress no more? Or the boats moored off La Zatere? Or the North Quay of the Censaria? Doc Ruon, that's the Greek weeping, Doc Ruon, weeping. And now in particular, well, I want everybody to pay attention to the next moment, what goes on here. The poet Tom Gunn pointed out this passage, and to him it was the key to the entire cantos. And I think it's really maybe the finest example of how Pound has begun to write. So, Paul, when you were asking about what was Olson drawing from the Pisan cantos, this particular passage that will go on for, well, actually, it'll go on till the end, but I want to just catch a little bit here. Notice he's just been weeping, Ezra Pound, wondering, will I ever see the Guideccia again, or the lights against it, and remembering all these places, or the 2 towers where are the cypress no more, or the boats. And then he brings back that Dacruon, weeping, weeping from the Agamemnon. And we have to take it that that's his state of mind. And then a pause. And then he looks up at the roof of his tent. And Brother Wasp is building a very neat house of 4 rooms, one shaped like a squat Indian bottle. La Vespa, mud, swallow system, so that dreaming of Bracelonde and of Perugia and the great fountain in the piazza, or of old Bulagayo's cat that with a well-timed leap could turn the lever-shaped door handle, it comes over me that Mr. Walls must be a 10-strike with the signorinas, and in the warmth after chill sunrise, an infant, green as new grass, has stuck its head or tip out of Madame La Vespa's bottle. I want to stop there a moment. We're going to need to go on. It's a terrible place to pause, but let's go back just that little bit on the previous page. And Brother Wasp is building a very neat house. This is Pound's state of mind. In the little corner of his tent, Brother Wasp is building a very neat house of 4 rooms, one shaped like a squat Indian bottle. La Vespa. And then he remembers the Italian. La Vespa. In other words, it's not a brother at all, it's a Madam Wasp. But he doesn't go back and correct it. He leaves the error to stand. That's the direct line into Robert Duncan, you could say, who treasured errors in his poetry and left them in. That's the Olsonian sense of one perception leading to another. Your first perception that it's Brother Wasp, and you describe the house he's building, and your next perception is that no, it's La Vespa, it's Madam Wasp, but you don't change it, you keep with it. La Vespa, mud, swallow system, so that dreaming of Bracelonde and of Perugia and the great fountain in the piazza, or of old Bulagayo's cat that with a well-timed leap could turn the lever-shaped door handle. It comes over me that Mr. Walls must be a 10-strike with the signorinas. And in the warmth after chill sunrise, an infant, green as new grass. Remember, we've seen him watching the ants. We've seen him watching a mite half the size of an ant and a lizard. We've seen him welcoming the lion-colored pup spreading fleas, and now he's seeing an infant, green as new grass, has stuck its head or tip out of Madame La Vespa's bottle. This is a celebration of spring, just like William Carlos Williams or H.D. would do. Seeing that little wasp head stuck out of the little clay bottle, out of Madame La Vespa's bottle. And now we're going to have to really go into the underworld, following this little wasp with Ezra Pound. Has stuck its head or tip out of Madame La Vespa's bottle. Mint springs up again in spite of Jones's rodents. Has had the clover by the gorilla cage with a 4-leaf. When the mind swings by a grass blade, an ant's 4-foot shall save you. The clover leaf smells and tastes as its flower. Think of him now, down on his knees. He's smelling the clover leaf and tasting it. It tastes and smells the same as its flower. The infant, this is the infant wasp, the infant has descended from mud on the tent roof to Tellus being the earth mother, from mud to the tent, on the tent roof to Tellus. Like to like color he goes amid grass blades. Phonos, earth, phonos, oi phonoi, to carry our news to them that dwell under the earth, begotten of air, that shall sing in the bower of Kore, Persephone, and have speech with Tiresias. Remember what Yeats wrote that I read to you? There's 2 themes, and the first is the descent to Hades, and that's where we began the cantos. And now 553 pages later, we're descending under the earth again and going down and have speech with Tiresias, Thebai. Cristo Rey, Dio Sole. In about half a day, she has made her adobe, La Vespa, the tiny mud flask. And that day I wrote no further. Let's stop there for a moment. Shall we come back to full screen for a moment, Paul? I'd like to give people a chance to say something. I know, Roxy, you had put something in the chat, and I wanted to see if you wanted to say something about it or expound upon it.
Just thinking, about the frame of mind that he might be in. It's all speculation, of course, as we project onto people, but I imagine that it has to do with not having time or recognizing that, and what's the point in trying to create a polished treatise on, that's going to stop war when you realize your frailties and your limitations, and that the realization of those might be as profound as anything monumental that he's trying to do. But I was curious what your take on it is that he's leaving errors in.
I think it's just a new way of writing that he's coming upon. He's not only leaving the error in, but he's also, that little passage we just finished, and that day I wrote no further. Suddenly he is like in his poem in a way that he has not been before. He's had all sorts of techniques to further you through. But I think, it would be glib to say he's paying attention to the materiality, but he is. The materiality is he writes and he writes an error, and he leaves it and he corrects the error and he leaves the correction in. And then he tells you, after we've dropped down to see Tiresias again, that he stopped there. He's written no further that day. I think we're on to a kind of writing that is very reminiscent of, I would say the same kind of painting going on in New York at the time. The